You know, guys, this might be the first year that I don't actually do a major GPU video. And that's entirely because nothing's really been that exciting. Let's be honest, NVIDIA released a line that is just more expensive and more or less the same as the one prior. Yes, technically the 5080 is a little bit faster than the 4080 Super, but it's so minimal that the extra cost doesn't seem worth it to me. And then on AMD's side, they haven't released a GPU as fast as their previous flagship. And I already have one of their previous flagship. So they're not topping their own game. And NVIDIA is kind of just taking a victory lap. And it just made it so that nothing really stood out this year. And so around this time of year, I like to do one larger video. And because nothing was really exciting me, I was actually worried that I wouldn't have anything ready for you guys. That was until I discovered this monitor. Now, it is GPU money to buy something like this, but this might actually be the largest upgrade I have made to my setup in a very long time. And I would argue would be more valuable than a GPU upgrade in certain cases. So let's get right into it. Now, the eagle-eyed among you might already have an idea of what this monitor is, and that's because it appeared in another video. In fact, it appeared in the video for the monitor that's on top, the Samsung monitor that I bought at Best Buy. Turns out I'm still using it, but that is because, well, two 32-inch monitors stacked together is a little bit nicer than having one 27 and one 32-inch. Just looks a little bit nicer. It's like a giant DS screen. Digressing. This is actually the same monitor that I showed off in that video when I started to do the research into the Samsung monitor to see what I could buy and how much it would cost to get the monitor of my dreams. And when I was doing that, I stumbled upon an OLED monitor that seemed too good to be true. We're talking QD OLED, 4K, 165 Hertz, and less than $1,000. It's $799 currently, but it was like $750 at the time of the video. And thanks to the holidays coming up, you're probably gonna be able to get it close to that $750 price point, which is exciting because it was originally $900, still under $1,000, but hey, $100 off is pretty good. Now, that price did make me pause for a second because it almost seems too good to be true. And I'm happy to say that, spoiler alert, this is what I would recommend to most people. So let's go back in time a little bit, unbox it, show you the unboxing experience, and talk about the features of this device. Now, unboxing this monitor is like any other, except it's a little bit heavier. There are no LCD panels that quite weigh as much as this one did. So there is the same kind of clip-in mechanism in the back, and the stand is okay. It's a little bit weird to use. It's sloped, so you can't really set anything on top of it. And it does have a pretty large footprint, but it does have height adjustment, and it does have a limited amount of tilt and swivel. It's about 30 degrees. So you're not going to be able to go full 180 and turn it sideways, but it's perfectly serviceable. Now, this monitor is a bit of a beast. As mentioned in the intro, this thing is 4K 165 Hertz. That is more than most PCs can drive. Even my two strongest GPUs struggle to hit that 165 in high-end games. And so what will end up being really important is how well does this monitor respond to games at 60 and 100, which are essentially an old school lock of most games. They like to run at 60, and then 100 being a more feasible frame rate to resolution than, well, the full 165. Now, what I will say is that 32 inches 4K is a beautiful pixels per inch. I, for the first time in a very long time, can't discern the individual pixels. And that is kind of awesome. And I don't know if that's because it's OLED or if it's 4K, but whatever the combination of the two is, it makes it so that things look smooth. Stair stepping doesn't seem to be a big issue, even on content that isn't 4K. I did play some games at 1080p and found that it still looks really, really good. So I do wonder if maybe the monitor has some built-in filtering that I have yet to figure out how to turn off. There are a lot of settings and it's very confusing on when and where you can use each of them. The monitor itself does ship at 75% power. This is probably to hit that elusive power target that the US put in. So you will have to manually adjust it. And then there is a vivid color profile, which mine is currently set into, that only can be unlocked after accepting that this may cause some level of extra degradation. And I have to say, once you get it set to the right modes, everything looks so good on this. Colors pop, blacks are dark, and the brights are surprisingly bright. Now, HDR is generally something that I turn off and kind of just forget about because I haven't had a good HDR experience. And surprisingly, this screen has delivered in a way that I didn't really expect. Its top nits are not really that bad. It's 1000 nits, and at 32 inches, 1000 nits is still pretty bright. But what it is it's able to go to a much darker dark than most LED monitors, and that's thanks to OLED and how OLED actually works. This thing is actually VESA True Black 400 certified, which is a rating that is more appropriate for OLEDs since their peak brights generally aren't as bright as LCD. I have run into situations while playing games like, say, Genshin Impact and logging in, where I have actually flashbanged myself just trying to log in because there's that blinding white screen that just... And yeah, it is that bright. It can hurt to look at bright objects while using this screen. And to be completely honest, I now understand why Linus of Linus Tech Tips talks about HDR and loves it so much, because I've had nothing but bad HDR experiences up to this point. It also happens to be one of the few displays that works properly with Nintendo Switch 2 content. Yes, I found the golden one that is set up to whatever Nintendo was setting up their HDR to do. The handshakes work perfectly, and surprisingly, content like Mario Kart World actually doesn't look too bad when you actually have a screen that is well designed for it. And of course, calibrating to that screen is easier when you're calibrating to the blacks and not the whites, and the vibrancy is, yeah. Let's just say calibrating for the Nintendo Switch 2 and calibrating for Windows is very similar. And both kind of annoy me. So the image looks good. The image gets bright. The image gets dark. But how are the response times? Well, this is where OLED truly shines, but I'm gonna have to go into slow motion in order to show it. Now, I'm gonna record this at 170 FPS, which is faster than the refresh rate of the monitor. But the only downside is I'm going to be recording at 1080p. So it's not going to be truly representative of what content looks like on this thing. So let's do that. Now, I was worried going into the slow motion testing that I was going to ruin the illusion here, that we were going to break all of the magic and I was going to see things that I could not unsee. This happened with the Samsung monitor, and I was genuinely afraid that I was going to effectively peep just a little too far into this monitor. And I'm happy to say it performs in every single test we threw at it. So we'll start with Muse Dash. Muse Dash is great because it's almost like a blur buster test. It is effectively just sprites going across the screen at ridiculously high frame rates in game form. And it's also a music game, so I can't play any of the music unless I had turned on streamer mode, which I did not. So regardless, what you can see from this clip is that with even pacing, everything looks crisp and clear. Text is perfectly legible, even if it's not in English. And the actual movement of sprites from left to right are pretty much blurless. There is a little bit of blur, but I think that actually is coming from the camera itself and not from the screen, because in later clips, you'll be able to see how clear it actually is. This might have just been the camera trying to compensate for the darks and the extremely bright brights in front of it. Our next section is Cyberpunk 2077. This is a game that is unideal and ideal at the same time for testing. So this is one of the few games that you're really going to want to look at on a screen like this. It's got HDR built in. It looks gorgeous, even without ray tracing. And it is a game that is still very hard to run on modern hardware. And if we actually look at this in slow motion, what we're going to see is the clarity is impressive. So things like windmills moving, the road itself moving past you is being rendered perfectly and without ghost images on the road. There is still motion blur enabled on these clips, and that is just because I kind of prefer a game like this that's a little bit more cinematic to look a little bit more cinematic. Digressing, if you actually look at the details and you go frame by frame on them, what you'll see is that they are just perfectly rendered. And it is not something to take for granted when you are driving really fast like this, to have the ability to see the lines on the road as an individual line and instead of a long continuous one. Additionally, the items like the windmills out here have a tendency to blur together on some cheaper screens to the point that it looks like these windmill blades, despite them having more than normal, would have like 16 blades. So overall, this is a really good test for this screen, and it is a really cool experience. I actually did feel that it almost was rendering a little bit too smooth at times. When I was walking around in first person just playing the game, I thought that it felt almost like there was a motion smoothness thing happening, and it wasn't. It was just the refresh rate plus the response time creating that almost perfect image. And now for our good bad example, Mario Kart World. Now, Mario Kart World is a good bad example for a couple reasons. One, it is a locked 60 FPS game. Two, it's on the Switch 2, which means we know that we're not dealing with VRR, and we're going to be entirely reliant on the Switch 2's frame pacing. And I have to say, this is actually a really cool example. Now, 165 hertz comes out to roughly 3 frames per frame is what I'm counting on the actual capture, because it's 170 FPS capture. And honestly, it looks good in practice. So essentially, for every 3 captured frames of the camera, we're seeing no movement. But we're also seeing no movement, not blurred movement, which is something that, unfortunately, when we were testing things like the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally and the Switch 2's screen, we could see very clearly. Essentially, every frame had just a little bit of blur. And there are some in-between frames every once in a while, but that I think is more of just a mismatch of the refresh rate and capture rates, to be completely honest. And what you can see from this clip is that it looks gorgeous in motion. Like, we're seeing HDR that actually looks really nice on the Switch 2. We're seeing crisp gameplay that actually is taking advantage of what this hardware can actually do. And we're seeing gameplay that actually looks better than it would on the default screen of the Switch 2. Now, a lot of this performance is to be expected, and that is because this is an OLED monitor, QD OLED, and a fast one at that. OLED as a technology is great at some things and not so good at others, and those drawbacks are why they haven't really hit mainstream. So OLED has a completely different technology than LCD, despite having the, well, LED part of their name. They do still have LEDs, but they're organic LEDs, and that means that they can turn themselves completely on or off. Essentially, think of each individual pixel like its own individual screen. It emits its own light, and it changes its own colors. This is one of the benefits and downsides to OLED. Because each individual pixel has its own set of functions, it burns out on its own as well. And this is why there are things like screen burn problems with OLEDs. Now, newer OLED panels have come a long way into reducing that screen burn. There are things we can do, such as hiding the taskbar, making sure that there are no static icons on the screen, having moving wallpapers like Wallpaper Engine are all popular ways to mitigate it, but the screen itself also has some things built in. This is also why we've got excellent black performance and pretty good white performance. But it's also why it's not as bright and definitely not as power efficient as LEDs. So your benefits to OLED are self-emitting pixels, which means no need for local array dimming zones or a strobing backlight, or essentially a backlight that is all the way across, which gives it better performance in darker scenes. OLED's main drawback is that it has a high risk of burn-in, and that burn-in can be distracting. Good news is this monitor comes with a 3-year warranty, which is nice, and that is on the OLED panel itself. That is entirely covering damage that can be done to the panel while the default settings are applied, so maybe don't turn on that vivid one if you're a little bit worried about that. Fortunately, I've been using it for around 3 months and there have been no signs of burn-in. That is also because of extra features that this thing has that help protect it. When you power off the screen, it will actually start its refresh cycle, and it will do that unless interrupted. And it will tell you if it gets interrupted. It also will remind you every 4 hours of constant use that it needs to do a refresh cycle in order to help protect the panel. Additionally, there are things like auto dimming. When I was writing the script for this and I had the large Word document, it actually dimmed it so that there would be a lower chance of burn-in occurring. Additionally, when it's inactive, it will start to dim as well. And if you are really scared about burn-in, there are features to automatically turn off the screen, like the ones that there are in Windows. There's also pixel shifting, which moves things around ever so slightly to help prevent that burn-in. So with all the safety features and the warranty, I actually have a bit of confidence that this is actually going to last those 3 years, or at least until I replace the panel. And I have to say, also having the price under $1,000 does kind of help a little bit. This is an incredible monitor for its price. It's definitely the sign that OLEDs are starting to come down in price, and that is a good thing. The lower the price on stuff like this gets, the more obtainable it is for more people to use. And so while this may have been tech that was cutting edge like a year, maybe 2 years ago, as it gets more and more affordable, it will make it so that more and more people can experience it. And I have to say, the OLED fans are right. It's good. It's really good. It's to the point that I'm enjoying playing games that I didn't necessarily enjoy on my old screens. There aren't any signs of ghosting. The refresh rates are incredible. The image looks amazing, and HDR is just the cherry on top. I actually found that disabling ray tracing just to get a higher frame rate ended up being a better trade-off when you're using a screen like this. And in truth, the last few months I've been using this screen have been great. Whether it's been on the Switch 2 or my PC games, everything has looked pretty phenomenal. Of course, you do need to change some settings every once in a while, and luckily the positioning for the control knob is in the center, which is actually a little bit easier to use when you have it mounted like I do with the monitor arms. So in many ways, it has been a very pleasant experience to use, and a monitor that I would consider worth upgrading to if you are looking for something that's around $800. The drawbacks are the typical ones that you'd expect from OLED, and I do advise you do some research to make sure that this is a trade-off that you are willing to accept. But if those drawbacks are something that you're willing to accept, this could be the difference between a good gaming experience and an amazing gaming experience for you. Now, there are higher end models with even more HDR, but this one is serving its duty well and at a price that I can stomach, and they're only going to get cheaper from here. So yes, I recommend this thing. And I want to know down below, do you game on an OLED? Are you thinking about gaming on an OLED? Do you want maybe a 1440p high refresh rate OLED as opposed to a 4K one? And more importantly, I want to know how your day is going. Are you having a good day? I hope so. But I'll see you in the next video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Wolfie, out.